have we had people on the moon? Like, you could debate that.
So you think the Earth is spherical?
Yes, obviously.
Okay.
The Earth is.
Well, are you sure we're not flat?
A severe damage to public trust.
I see my students all the time. They're doing the goose step around.
Yeah.
The athlete in me's like, this is so bad.
Who's the biggest person you ever?
I think Quentin Aaron.
Well, I'm pretty, so we're 6'5" and 300 pounds. Like, I don't worry about my safety the same way that the average person
That I do.
Yeah, the same way.
5'7". Those are all those conspiracy theorists are becoming right now. You're like, maybe it wasn't a conspiracy.
Well,
Here we are again. Juan Adams here with the Fade Podcast. You can catch a fade and then go catch a fade right after. Here with our co-host, Jeff Chavez, and our special guest today, chiropractor extraordinaire, YouTube sensation, Dr. Beau Hightower.
greetings and salutations.
Nice.
Right, yeah. So we were just talking about some of our funniest, crazy conspiracy theories, and we're talking about the moon landing, right? And I was saying that, like, I just love how America, we've started to sensationalize pseudo-intellectuals, and it's just because they're confident. That's it. They're like above average intelligence, and they pick something and run with it. And the moon, like the fact that people don't believe we've been to space is the bigger one. Like, have we had people on the moon? Like, you could debate that, and none of us were alive when it happened. But my favorite thing was just, I was watching a Candace Owens interview, and she was saying, well, the Van Allen belt has, go and look up the temperature that the materials of the spaceship were allegedly made of and see what time they die or at what point they melt. See if it can survive 59 minutes to an hour and a half through the Van Allen belt. And, like, that sounds smart, right?
Right.
It sounds really smart until you, like, understand physics and, like, what space is and how heat transfer actually works, right? Like, so yes, those temperatures are really high, and under Earth's atmospheric conditions, those things would melt. But in order for heat transfer to happen, there has to be friction, and more specifically, particles bouncing off of each other. Space is a vacuum. There's no particles up there, so you can't have heat transfer. So the material doesn't actually get that hot. So that was like those are my favorite things.
What you just described as a question I've always had about space is the usage of air as a propellant, leaking air out of a shuttle or whatever to move it or to spin it. And I have a friend that actually works at NASA, and I'm just not knowledgeable enough, and none of us here are because we're not NASA scientists.
Right.
We're not physicists. But I was just trying to get, because, just a basic understanding. I'm like, so how does that work? And he's like, well, it's like pushing off of a chair. But I'm like, yeah, but if the chair's not on the ground, doesn't that air have to push off of something to put an opposite force to move it? And he's saying, no, it's just unlimited movement.
Yeah.
Either direction.
And I guess it's pushing off the molecules of the actual shuttle itself.
Exactly.
Then moves it. But in my conceptual head, like, it has to be pushing off of something. Like when you take off the ground, it's pushing off of something to initiate it.
Well,
and then it's pushing off the air as it's going up.
So
too.
the way it works is like, and I'm a science teacher, so that's why I'm going to say this stuff. But all gravity is a force of attraction between two objects. The greater the mass, the greater the force of attraction. So in space, when there's no conflicting objects out there, everything has its own gravity unless they're in the vicinity of a significantly more massive object.
Right.
All right. So then you get into the laws of motion, and you get into everything has an equal and opposite reaction. So when you're in space, the spaceship is the only object that really is there. So that's the thing with the most gravity. And if something's inside that spaceship, it's pressing off of that thing. When you're pushing that force out, the force goes somewhere.
Right.
But if there's nothing that way to push it, it's just unlimited. You can just keep going.
It doesn't have to push off something, which is
Yeah,
it's very hard for us.
Right.
So your gravitational pull comes from within, is what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, for our logic, obviously, because we're never functioning in space, is like we always think of something moving, it has to push off of something. If I was just floating, I would have to push off of something, right? If there's nothing to push off of, then I'm just
You
pushing
just look
into
like
nothing.
fools going like this.
Exactly.
But the thing is, like in the space movies and stuff you watch where there's no gravity in the ship, there still is air, so there is something to push off of.
Right. So it's those particles in there.
And even vacuum space has stuff.
It has, yeah, it is
Some
very
some stuff.
super small stuff. But so what happens is like in the spaceship, right? You can create, so it's recycled air or whatever, but those things weigh a lot.
If space is real.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff on those ships. So like everything within that is its own separate little system, and they're called energy systems.
So you think the Earth is spherical?
Yes, obviously.
Okay.
The Earth is.
Well, you sure we're not flat?
That's what Big Globe wants you to believe.
Well, you made a comment earlier. You said you could call a friend in Australia and say, "Hey, did this," and that makes sense.
Right.
You can't do that if it's flat, right?
Right. Yeah. But flat earthers, they think Australians are like actors or something. They have all kinds of.
They're like, they're not real.
And there's an explanation for everything with them, and that's the cool thing.
But they don't even understand what words mean. They're like, it's density. I'm like, yeah, but density doesn't exist without gravity.
Correct.
There is no density. Things don't move up or down. Like if I'm taking a test tube of blood, the red blood cells would go to the bottom, and they are more dense. But that doesn't happen unless there's gravity.
Exactly.
The term you're using doesn't work in the absence of the other term you don't want to exist.
Well, my other favorite is a lot of people don't like, and this is I throw a lot of like little terms out there to determine someone's intellectual level before I'll have a real conversation with them, because there's so much. There's this phenomenon going on right now where we're just like changing the definitions of words to better suit a narrative, and I can't do it. So we're sitting there and. Most people don't even understand the difference between weight and mass.
Right.
Right? Your mass is the same wherever you are.
Right.
But your weight will be different, even on different parts of Earth, because gravity is
we were just talking
water.
about
Get water and your weight.
Exactly.
If I'm on top of a mountain,
your mass is still
I don't
there.
weigh as much as I do.
Exactly.
If I'm in Death Valley.
Right. So anyway, so speaking of weight, you got some pretty like when you're doing chiropractic work.
I thought you were going to say I move rhymes like weight.
No. When you're doing like chiropractic work, how hard is it working with like bigger clients?
Physics is real.
Yeah, physics is real.
And that's what, particularly like manipulation, that's something people don't realize. Like me as a patient, like I'm actually pretty dense. I'm 5'11", 2 something. Smaller people can't do adjustments on me, like, and it's just not the same. So like when I get adjusted, it usually has to be somebody that's bigger than me, taller than me. Technique matters too, right? Technique can beat size if your hand speed is good, if your setup's good. But if you're big enough, you can get away with bad technique just by sheer physics.
Right.
So my technique has to be much faster, much cleaner on a bigger person, and the odds of failure are obviously higher.
Right.
Who's the biggest person you ever? Who's the biggest person you ever?
I think Quentin Aaron.
And was it
for the guy from the Blind Side? He's like 6'8", 5 something or whatever.
Did you use your techniques that you use with this chisel?
Yeah.
And how did he feel about that?
It was good. And then Brian Shaw is another one that like they're built different, right? Brian Shaw is huge across his chest, so there's this funny clip going around on YouTube like where I can't get my hands here to do a thoracic move because my arms aren't long enough considering how big his like shoulders and chest are. Like I can't get my arms around it. That's the first time that's ever happened. So, physics is real. Like,
what do you do on a case like that? When you can't, do you have a method? Do you have a method?
Yeah, there's different ways to do different things.
So you're not just you're just not void of an opportunity.
Yeah, and that's some like when we talk about science too. Like you have published studies, but it's particularly in medicine and health. Like they lack context a lot of times.
Yeah.
And some people are so obsessed with the literature that they throw away the basics as well. So like in our field, like exercise science, we'll get into this all the time. Like one way that we can communicate in a normal way with normal people is we talk about like joints and muscle strength. And so one analogy we'll use is like, the stronger your quads are, the less pressure there is on your knees because the muscle can take the force instead of you wearing into the joints.
Right.
And people will argue with that, and they'll cite studies that say, we don't know how the force distributes. And I go, okay, based on these studies, that's true. You can't control these variables, but let's just do a real-world experiment. Jump up and down and keep your knees locked out while you land. And tell me what the force into the joints of your knees and your hips are and how that feels. And if you did that 100 times, what that would feel like, as opposed to you jumping and squatting and transferring the force into your glutes and your quads. And there are people out there that are so weak in their legs that they are literally walking around like that because their legs aren't strong enough.
Straight-legged?
Yeah. Because it keeps them from collapsing, but they're straight leg locking their joints in. And logically over enough
They
years.
don't want to crease their shoes. Bro.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're wearing Jordans.
Hey, I see my students all the time. They're doing the goose step around. And
Yeah.
the athlete in me is like, this is so bad.
Right, you're going to accumulate damage over time. Like you can't throw out logic and reasoning and real world experimentation. Like if you published a study that said I can't break a window with a hammer, and we're like, well, the literature says, and I go, that's interesting. Watch this, boom.
Right.
What are you going to believe? You know, like
The truth.
right. And I think what you're getting into is science communication, which is like has just gone under major scrutiny in the last few years. And some of this is from like public health and maybe the necessary infantilization of the population. I don't know. Where you're willing to obfuscate the truth for the greater good, and I think we saw that with the vid. Right?
The vid, yeah.
Where we intentionally lied.
The definition of a vaccine.
Yeah, where we intentionally obfuscated the truth about the efficacy of certain types of masks, because they just decided that people were too dumb to understand the nuance. So you would save more lives by just generalized lying to people about the efficacy of a cloth, versus an N95, which are obviously very different. We've had the literature on that for a long time. And same thing with sterilizing vaccines, a measles vaccine, a polio vaccine versus a respiratory virus vaccine. Like the flu vaccine is not a sterilizing vaccine. That's why they're constantly coming up with them. And, our leaders obfuscated the truth of that, which has done a severe damage to public trust in the scientific communicators and speakers.
Right.
And they'll never admit that, but they're I think the reasoning would be is that we were too dumb to understand that, so they had to tell us that, and because they did that, it saved more lives than if you didn't do that.
Do you think during that specific time, the masses of the doctors and the scientists were ignored based on the government's the people they pulled in? They said these are the top guys versus the actual top guys speaking out over here that were being pushed down, saying no, those guys are idiots. Those guys are idiots. Because you look at those guys now, and those guys are all those conspiracy theorists are becoming right now. You're like, maybe it wasn't a conspiracy.
Well, and I think the polarization and the politicalization of everything in our society pushes us into these corners of weird, strange bedfellows, right? Like these science communicators, they're so adamant against going against conspiracies that they're willing to shill for things that are not healthy for you. Like you'll see these science people, they'll be like, "Oh, aspartame's fine, diet soda's fine," but it's not as good as water. Like it erodes your teeth, it disrupts your gut microbiome, it has artificial dyes in there that are not good for you.
And the weirdest thing from all that was I don't understand how MMA and that got so embedded.
Yeah.
But and for me, a lot of it is Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, people get knowledgeable enough about something to start feeling confident, but not knowledgeable enough to realize what they don't know.
Right.
So they become very confident and very loud. Kobe Covington. People like that. And it's weird because you see in the fight, Bryce Mitchell, another example.
Yeah.
Brilliant fighter. And I was a fan for a little bit, and then I started, posted a stack of books that he had over there, and it's like, oh, okay.
He has markets on it.
This is Anarchist Manifesto, which is cool. I'm all about anarchy, but I'm 6'5" and 300 pounds. I don't worry about my safety the same way that the average person
That I do.
Yeah, the same way.
5'7".
Would you call that big privilege?
Yeah, I guess big privilege, and I'm pretty, so
and humble too.
Yeah, I'm pretty.
But we talk about you talk about the medicines and the viruses and that stuff. So I was actually talking to some chiropractors just this last week. I was in San Antonio, Texas, and we just had these two chiropractors, older people, and I said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Beau Hightower?" And they're like, "No." So I started explaining your methodology, and I actually brought a video up on your YouTube.
And they probably had a stroke.
And they, oh my gosh, the lady was like, "Oh my gosh," and I'm like, "What's wrong?" She goes, "That is just nuts. I would never do that. That person should be stopped." And I was like, "You realize this is probably one of the most techniques that he's using right now. People are just praising him over, but you're saying," she says, "but that would destroy a skeletal system." And I'm like, obviously not, because he has people come. She said something about big boned and little boned, and I said, "Is there such thing as big bone and little bone?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, because I always, my mom always said that my sister was big boned.
Right.
And I started to
Her
think
sister
maybe it's because she's
affected.
bigger, but
Fat.
like the skeletal system is the skeletal system regardless of what you look at. Unless his skeletal system is bigger than mine,
Right,
but in
right.
reality, like if he was my size, our skeletal
Right.
system and my size, and so she was losing her mind, and so I was like, oh, I'm getting ready to talk to him tomorrow. She's like, well, you need to tell him he needs to stop that. Of course, she was like 85 years old.
Well,
So
Okay, lady. That's the
different.
fun thing being in my in between things, because like I have a lot of problems with a lot of chiropractors because of their fundamental misunderstanding of basic sciences a lot of times. But then also physicians don't like me because I happen to be a chiropractor too. So I get bullets from both sides. So it's like you can't win.
Always
But I would say,
catch
well,
some
if both sides
strays.
hate you, maybe you're close to the truth. Like
yeah.
So you do get like a lot of medical professionals that are like, this guy's nuts. Don't
Sure,
go.
anybody that doesn't know me definitely feels that way. But I have like 60 physicians as patients, and I have a lot of chiropractors as patients too. So, if you're just watching curated social media clips, that you're going to come to whatever conclusions you're going to come to, right?
Do you teach
Instead
your,
of
do
coming
you
and
teach your
talking to
system?
somebody and asking.
Do you ever get to go teach your system at like schools of chiropractic?
No, absolutely not. Only to our people. Like we keep everything in house.
Good.
Yeah, their people are the best. I work with Anthony
Yeah.
all the time,
He's
and he's
awesome.
amazing. But what I love about him
He hasn't broken your spine yet? He hasn't
He hasn't
destroyed
destroyed
your
you.
system?
Never, bro. Anthony, man, I remember I drove down to Houston and back like in a weekend. And I do it frequently, but like as I'm getting
long
older,
drive.
it's taking more out of me. And I got back and I'm like, man, it's hurting to breathe. My back hurts. I couldn't move. And he was
It's the
like,
worst.
you probably set one of your ribs off. You drive with one hand? I'm like, yeah, I'm driving with my left hand. He went in there, like, did his thing. And I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. But he's also always learning. And, like, that's what I like about all the guys at Elite-OSM and the ladies, too. Is, like, you guys are always learning and dedicated to that craft. And that, like, commitment to excellence and commitment to improvement is why like this place works so well.
Yeah.
You have fighters down here. The Holly Holm, prime example. She was a world champion in multiple things, but she's always down there, always trying to find something new, a new skill. Coach, and what I love about the coach, a lot of people will say like Coach Wink or Greg. I've heard some crazy shit from people that have no knowledge of fighting,
Right.
but they're always changing things. Like we have our base system, and they have something that they think is really going
Right,
to
there's
work.
principles and fundamentals, but
Yeah.
you're always
But they're always ready
Bringing
to
techniques
adapt
in.
it, man. And then once the game adjusts to their adaptation, they try something new. And I love that because it's that strange intersection of like the right amount of confidence, but the right amount of humility also to understand knowing what I don't know. Like I don't know everything. I know I'm pretty good at certain things, but like let's try and get better at those things and decrease what I don't know.
And acknowledging that other people are better at things than you are. Like you're not. None of us are omnipotent or omniscient. Like what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like the hammer stuff, right? Like I didn't invent that. Like so the first thing I did is I got really good at soft tissue work, and I thought I could fix everything, right? And I couldn't, obviously, because there were some things that I couldn't. And so actually we got that from Alistair Overeem had an MD from the Netherlands that would come down and treat him, and he had the hammers and chisels, and that was something like his mentor like created or whatever. And I was like, oh, this will never work. What a bunch of crap. I was acting like this.
Yeah, like the other guy.
Right? Yeah, like everybody else, right? And like he fixed Toose's back that I couldn't, and then he worked on my ankle, and I was like, oh shit. Then I realized like this is actually something that I need to like incorporate. And so we bought some of the tools from him. He taught us some stuff, and then we modified it as we've gone on as well. And whether it's dry needling or whatever else, like everything has its place. So it's just finding the right pieces for the right person, and just never thinking that you know everything, because you don't. And that's why I'm as much of a skeptic as I am. I'm open-minded about everything, just for the simple fact that I've been proven wrong so many times in my life. Where I'm like, that's bullshit. That would never work. And then I see it happen. And they fix somebody or they fix me, and I'm like, oh shit, I guess it does work. Like, and I was just so closed-minded coming into it.
Yeah.
So now I'm way more open-minded. Just enough reps of that, I'm like, okay, let me not just.
Yeah. It's one of those.
And also not to judge other people, because guess what? Everybody judges me too, so that's pretty hypocritical.
Exactly.
You know?
And it's really similar too. As you say that, like being open-minded, you have to kind of look. You got to look at the track record of it, right? And it's funny because I use that same concept. Like when girls try to argue with me.
Yeah.
I had this one ex, and she was just like, "You think every guy that blah 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 is trying to get with me and blah blah blah?" I'm
Yeah.
like,
As a male, I can confirm that.
I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. I'll go. All right, let's run a little experiment. Like, you think this person is truly just a friend, right? Send them some flirty stuff right now and see how they respond to it. And I'm like, okay, that's one. I'm 1 for 1 right now. Let's try that. Like, with these 10 guys you told me that I shouldn't worry about.
Right.
Like, let's try that.
Let's just run a real world science experiment.
And then I'm like, oh, so I'm batting 1,000 over here, but you're the next one's gonna be the exception, right? You know. So it's one of those things. It's just funny to me how you have to be.
I'm gonna take a little bit off here.
You have to like inherently be humble about certain things and open-minded, or life finds a way to like
It'll humble you.
real quick. Like there's some stuff. Give prime example, state wrestling tournament. The head and arm used to be my move, and then my coach was like, that's not gonna work on everyone. And when it stopped working on everyone, I got away from it. In my head, I'm like, okay, no good wrestler does head and arms. Like, no good wrestler.
Until you need it.
Yeah. And they're like, no good wrestler. Like, and the good wrestlers don't get beaten with head and arms. State tournament.
Which is mostly true.
Yeah. State tournament. A guy just did a head and arm to a different side than what I normally saw. Landed on I lost consciousness. Landed, I was like, fuck. I got beat by a head and arm. And like, it wrecked me, dude. I was like crying. I'm like, not just because I had lost like my chance to be a state champ, but I was like, I can't believe I got beaten by a head and arm.
Right.
Like, and it's like that with all kind of moves, but you understand there's a time and place.
And there's mastery too, right?
Yeah, and mastery. So there was another guy.
Like if you're not practicing drilling against it, and somebody's drilling it all the time, and their head and arm is at a level 10 and not a level 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that high level head and arm that gets you.
Yeah.
It's not. It always doesn't look like a head and arm.
And their setup is different, right? Like.
Yeah. Oh, in college there was a
like
guy,
striking. If you can disguise your strike, you know.
Yeah, there was a guy that had taken an Olympic red shirt for judo.
It'd be like saying nobody should get hit with the straight. Like,
yeah.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
But when you do, guess what happens?
It sucks. Nobody's gonna pick you apart with a jab, except for like that one pro boxer where that's his only thing, and he's got 16 different types of jabs he can throw at you.
Right.
Like those are very different.
No good grappler gets hit with a Darce. Yeah, until you're tired and you've been hit, and you know.
So,
I mean,
you your lip. You don't like the overhang, right?
No. So like, yeah, the science communication. I think a good example is ivermectin.
Oh yeah.
Like in some states, the medical wards ban the doctors from prescribing it. And so this is a thing where everybody's kind of right. Like it is a globally important medication, right? But what is it for? Like we understand what the medication does. It's a chloride channel medication, which basically causes the helmint's muscles to be paralyzed. That's what it uses to kill parasites. Like it's a very specific medication, and it's fantastic for that. Why would that affect other types of like just because the helminth is small doesn't make it a bacteria or a virus, right? Like you're not going to give amoxicillin to somebody with a viral infection unless they have a secondary bacterial infection.
Because it won't do anything.
Right, that's not what that's for. You wouldn't give an HIV medication for somebody with a bacterial infection. And so when prescribed properly, it's a safe drug. So if a doctor who's educated, who's board certified, and the patient agree that they're going to take that medication, what's safer, to have a doctor prescribe a human dose or to have that person go down to the veterinarian warehouse
and get a horse dose?
Correct, and then maybe take too much of it or not be able to get the dose right. Like it's safer for the public to allow physicians to be physicians and prescribe. Now, there's no evidence that it works for that. But again, if a doctor and a patient agree to it, I don't see what the issue is. This is America. Like, patients are allowed to make choices, and doctors are allowed to prescribe. And so what happened is, of course, people over-exaggerated the value of the medication and started taking stuff they shouldn't. And actually, some people were harmed by that. And then, conversely, there was a shortage of it for people that actually needed it for other types of things.
Right. Well, that's the danger with like pseudo intellectuals. We live in the age where like information is more readily accessible now than it's ever been before, and that gives people this inflated sense of intelligence when they don't understand, like, and this is why, like, school's important, but, like, you don't want to go too far where you're only living in these ivory towers and discussing this on a conceptual level.
Right.
But you also have to understand that these concepts have names because they are actual things. Like, and a lot of these logical fallacies where it's, causation versus correlation.
That's the biggest
That's
one.
the biggest one.
And even the smartest people are subject to that.
Right.
Particularly like doctors.
But they don't believe they are.
Right.
That's the problem. They believe they're above the...
And of course, non-doctors are even more prone to it. But like, it's one of the most common... I mean, it's in our DNA, right? Like it's...
Yeah.
Hey, how do I survive? Well, draw a Pavlovian correlation between something and something else.
Yep.
This means that, right? This means food. This means danger.
Exactly.
Like our nervous system's been evolving for billions of years to do that. So now when we see something, we're like, oh, yep, they're out to get me.
Right.
And that's not even getting into like the mental illness, the bipolar people, schizophrenic people, and
Yeah. No, that's a whole different conversation right there. But like,
I'm all here now.
they think they're being gang stalked and all this.
Yeah.
I'm a targeted individual, like, bro.
I have to tell people all the time, like,
Are you serious?
what about your life? What have you done in
The
life that makes
narcissism.
you important enough
The narcissism.
for the government to give a fuck, or any
Right.
gang to give a fuck about
Right.
you? Like, I promise you, if the cartel really was after you, they're not doing
They're
it
gonna
over-
get you.
Right.
They're not doing it over
they're not
over a lone 8-ball of coke. I promise you,
Right.
that's not it right
even
there.
even drug usage, like the DEA people, like they're only after big fish, man.
Yeah.
You can be dealing for a while. They can know it, and they're still not going to put a case on you,
Right.
unless they want to flip you on a bigger fish or.
Yeah, they want to know who you're getting it from. It's just little stuff like that, and like just aside from that, but that's talking about
the
drugs.
causation correlation is like one of the.
That's the top line.
This is a philosophical issue, and I think a lot of scientists, unfortunately, despite having a PhD in doctor of philosophy, have a severe lack of philosophical understanding. Like,
Right.
Well, that's what my PhD is in, and you know what? You want to hear something funny? I go to universities every other week, and I speak in their philosophy department.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go there, I have students tell me all they're doing is regurgitating.
Man.
There is no philosophy. There's no philosophy coming out of their mouth. They're
Right.
just regurgitating one other
Other
person's philosophy.
philosophers,
And what
yeah.
I tell them is the worst thing you could do is take whatever his philosophy is and just use it as truth and fact, because what you've done is you've stunted your growth and you've stunted philosophy all around. And the philosophers are the worst too, because people listen to them. They're like, "Oh my gosh, he's amazing." Listen to
Voltaire,
Aristotle.
oh, man,
oh yeah,
Kant,
listen to all these guys, and they're
Ayn Rand, oh my God.
Yep.
But if you start to idolize someone, that's what I tell them. I said, when you start to idolize one of your professors, when you start to idolize someone that is got a doctorate and they've had a doctorate and you're seeking a doctorate, if you don't challenge them, then your doctorate and your philosophy is going to be just regurgitated junk that they had. And that's what's happened in our society. Oh man, I deal that every week.
Right,
man.
contextualize, right? Like, okay, Sigmund Freud, he did contribute some things, but also he was a cokehead. So, you have to take some of this shit with a grain of salt, man.
Pervert. Let's just get that.
Let's be real. Yeah, that's a weird.
Very weird obsession
Get
with
the fuck out of
breastfeeding,
here.
man.
So these are all just people, right? Like they're all completely flawed, just like the rest of us. And that doesn't mean that some people haven't made huge contributions to certain fields, right? But like, contextualize it. Like, nobody has all the answers. If you're lucky in life, you might be an expert in one thing. There's just not enough time to be great at everything. But there's even Dunning-Kruger between geniuses. Like you'll see that a lot with very intelligent. Like, let's just the people you're talking about, right? Like a Ben Shapiro. Like, you can't argue that guy isn't a smart person, a very intellectual person, and actually a fairly logical person too. But like, you study law or whatever else, like there's no chance that you're an expert on sports or whatever else. There's just not enough time, not enough hours. What's the astrophysicist dude, right? Like,
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Brilliant guy, obviously, objectively brilliant, but like, because he's brilliant and because he's a science communicator, he feels the need to venture into every field and act as the authority in those fields, and that's just not true, right? Like, it's not
right. And it's funny, like, I love when they all have, like, actors or something come on a sports show. I'm like, or like Lil Wayne, they love bringing Lil Wayne on like FS1 and stuff.
He's like, why?
I don't give a fuck what Lil Wayne thinks about the Super Bowl. I really don't. Like, I don't care what he thinks about the NBA Finals.
Or Stephen A. Smith talk about.
Yeah, Doc was like, okay, hold on a second. I want to have like a weird mustache looking right there.
Right, Stephen A. Smith's going to tell us about MMA. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, when they had him on the MMA, when they had him doing the MMA show for, what was it, PFL, or was it, I was like, what is he doing
Yeah, when
there?
he was hitting
That's
pads,
insulting.
bro.
I'm like, you're insulting me because he's
like his takes are wild on basketball, but he knows ball, right? Like,
Yeah.
he knows basketball. You know, some of it's just intentionally trying to get people inflamed. But like, there's people that jump on MMA stuff, and it's like, ooh, boy, like.
Right.
You might be an expert in some other field, but maybe this isn't it, right?
Right. And like, for
that'd be like me trying to explain the, Jeff's brother's a neurosurgeon, right? Like me trying to explain to him what really goes on during a brain surgery.
yeah.
Right.
I don't fucking know, right?
I have no clue. And that's the other thing. It's like, and I deal with this a lot too, like as a teacher. Like I'm getting my
he's
master's,
the expert in that field.
Like I'm getting my master's in secondary STEM education.
Mm-hmm.
So science, tech, engineering, math. Mm-hmm. Like that's what I'm getting my master's in, teaching that. But when kids start like trying to treat me as the authority on it, I have to check them all. And I'm like, look,
I'm still a student too.
I don't know.
I know more than you.
I might know more than you, but I'm not the expert. Like I always try to refer to them someone that's more skilled in that area. But that also comes from like me being humbled a lot in life in other fields that I'm very versed in.
Right.
You know, I had to get humbled in MMA, boxing, every sport I've ever played. Like there's a natural humbling, so I don't.
And there's always a bigger fish too,
Yeah.
right? Like there's always somebody better, smarter,
Exactly. So, and I know that, and I just try to apply that to everything else that I do. And it works out pretty well for me, but it's also shocking because you recognize that you're not the average person, right? And I think when we surround ourselves with people that are like that, or even like around very like real intellectual people like that, top 3 to 5% IQ range,
Right.
you kind of lose touch sometimes with what like the average person thinks and feels.
Also
like.
true.
So like when I go out all the time, I'm constantly having to remind myself like, oh, these are like average. We have a different experience. Like I can't talk about my life experiences all the time to everyone because like I'm 6'5", 300 pounds, pro athlete, master's degree. So like I can find different people to fit those different fields, but it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
And being mindful of that when you interact with people.
And we're not computers either. We're all wrong a lot. Like,
yeah, extremely wrong.
like I'm wrong all the time. In fact, a lot of people watching be like, yeah, this guy's literally in a pseudoscience field.
Yeah.
And, maybe they're right. I don't know. But, like, if you look at my educational background, right, like I have 3 bachelor's degrees, a master's, and 2 doctorate degrees, right? I'm board certified in chiropractic neurology, 350 hours of postdoc neuro. I'm board certified in pain management. I'm a certified independent chiropractic examiner. I've been dean's list every semester in medical school. My IQ, the last one was like 143 or something, so I'm in top 1% IQ societies. So that sounds like super rare, like, oh, cool, he's 1 in 100. Okay, say you're in a basketball stadium, it's got 20,000 people. Not that rare anymore, right?
Yeah, because there's a bunch of people in it.
Yeah. Or say you're in a med school where the average IQ is 120, right?
Yeah.
Like, now the mean has moved up a whole lot. Oh, now you're only in the top 15, 20% of the people.
Exactly.
In fact, not the highest, like, at all. Like,
right. And that's different, but
levels.
But you also understand basic statistics and stuff like that. That's my favorite when people are like, trust the science. I'm like, what science are you talking about?
Yeah.
We're looking at the same graph, but we're pulling 2 completely different sets of data from this. And
it's easzy to lie with data too, and to cherry pick, and
Confidence.
Yeah.
If you have confidence,
Yeah.
you can lie about anything.
And we can end it with that because there's this quote out there that there is someone exponentially less qualified than you that's doing exponentially better than you in life just because they believe in themselves.
Or maybe just luck, right?
Yeah, or just lucky.